So we're gonna talk about which branch is the toughest. I'm gonna be honest, this is just my bias. This is not a reflection of the DOD. This is just something that Jody did some research, or did a lot of research, to determine which branch is the toughest. I know a lot of people, when they're thinking about joining, some people want to be part of the toughest branch, and some people, quite frankly, don't want to be part of the toughest branch. So whatever side of the fence you're on, hopefully this video can answer your questions. I got a fogger. I tried to add some effect in the room. I may have put too much fog, I may have not. We'll see after we make this video. So I'm gonna be diving deep into the 6 different branches. I included the Coast Guard and the Space Force, and we're gonna be ranking them head to head on a toughness scale between 1 to 10. And we're not just gonna talk about how many push-ups each branch makes you do or how far they make you run. We're gonna look at a lot of different factors. In order to crown the toughest branch, we had to come up with the toughness formula, and there's 5 different core factors. 1, we're gonna talk about their PT requirements. 2, we're gonna talk about their basic training requirements and intensity. 3, we're gonna talk about their deployments and their likelihood to see combat. 4, we're gonna talk about their specialized roles, AKA like their special forces, special warfare. And 5, we're gonna talk about their historical lethality. We'll rank each of these branches on these 5 different factors, and at the end, we'll determine who is the toughest branch. All right, so first up, we're gonna start out with the newest branch, the Space Force. I don't know how they are connected to the foil wrap on their head with the little point on the top. I don't know if that's Nico Ortiz or who, but somehow it's stuck. So they're the newest branch. And although they are the Space Force, they are not going out into space, at least at this moment. But how tough are they? So currently, they follow the Air Force's PT standards, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But they have implemented this new testing for its members where they're trying to figure out if they're going to go a new way with their PT. So they're allowing some of the members to wear these wristbands where they basically monitor like their heart rate, their respiratory, and their musculoskeletal functions. And if these tests turn out to be good, then the Space Force will shift its PT towards that instead of like a traditional PT test. But because of their current PT standards, we're gonna give them a 5 out of 10 for PT requirements. As far as their basic training or their training intensity, currently the Space Force tags along with the Air Force at their basic training. So it's pretty much the Air Force's basic training, except the Space Force does have a 21-hour of additional course that they have to go through where they're basically learning like Space Force structure and history. So because of that, I gotta also give them a 5 out of 10 for their basic training because it's 7.5 weeks. Compared to the other basic trainings, it's probably not that intense. Now, for their deployments and the likelihood to see combat, Space Force is a Space Force. They don't have like an infantry, they don't have a job in the Space Force that is traditionally combative. When they first came about, a lot of people were talking about how they're gonna defend us from aliens and stuff. Maybe if we encountered aliens, the Space Force might have like a tougher branch. But as of now, the Space Force isn't trained to go out in space, nor are they trained for combat. Now, they are critical to modern warfare, but the Space Force is going to play a role behind enemy lines. They're going to be working with satellites. They're going to be working with a bunch of different systems, making sure that the other branches are good to go. And because of that, I got to give the Space Force a 2 out of 10. And next, as far as their specialized roles or their special warfare, the Space Force doesn't have any combat roles, but they could be staged for future space-based type of fighting. So who knows? I'm not gonna do them that bad. I'll give them a 2 out of 10. And lastly, as far as their historical lethality, they're brand new. They haven't been involved in any type of battles as of yet, so they don't have any historical lethality at this moment. So because of that, I gotta be honest, I gotta give them a 1 out of 10. And this brings the total toughness score for the Space Force to a 3 out of 10. But you know what? Their service uniforms are tough as hell. I don't know if y'all seen them, the new stuff that they're trialing right now. I think it'll be online in 2025. Those uniforms are tough. Probably the toughest uniforms of all the branches, in my opinion. They ain't gonna get no points because of it. but them uniforms tough. All right, next up, we have the Air Force, which is my favorite branch. But we gotta be real, how tough are they? So as far as the physical requirements, like I said, they have the same requirements as the Space Force. You're gonna have a 1.5 mile run, you're gonna have push-ups, you're gonna have sit-ups. The Air Force has a bunch of different alternative workouts as well. Instead of running, you can do what they call a hammer test, basically like a shuttle run, where you run back and forth. They also have some different strength exercises you can do, like hand release push-ups instead of the traditional push-ups. And they also let you do these cross-leg reverse crunches or a plank. You have to complete these physical tests twice a year unless you score over a 90 or above on your PT test. Then you only have to do it 1 time a year. And they also have this body composition thing that you have to do once a year where they measure your waist and basically make sure that your body is within standard. It won't be the hardest thing that you've ever done physically, but it's not a walk in the park. And because of that, I have to give the Air Force a 5 out of 10 for the physical fitness requirements. Next, let's look at their training intensity or their basic training requirements. So, Air Force basic training and Space Force basic training is more of like mental endurance and technical expertise rather than just like a physical grind. You got a 7.5 week course you got to go through where you're going to learn the Air Force history, Air Force structure. It is the shortest of all basic trainings along with the Space Force. So because of that, I got to give them a 5 out of 10 for their basic training intensity. As far as their deployments and likelihood to see combat, the Air Force does deploy. Most of their combat is being seen from the planes in the air doing what they have to do, but its members do deploy. Now, most likely you'll deploy behind enemy lines, but anything is possible. Units like security forces, the Red Horse Airmen, and the Special Warfare Airmen, they can definitely go outside of safety, but beyond them, it's not too common. And for that, I have to give them a 5 out of 10 for its members' combat readiness. Now, as far as their specialized roles or their Special Warfare Airmen, the Air Force is no slouch. Their Special Warfare Airmen are the complete opposite of the term Chair Force. Put some respect on them. The Air Force has some of the toughest Special Warfare Airmen in the Department of Defense. They have their pararescuemen, they have their combat controllers, their TAC-P, their special reconnaissance. All of these careers are hardcore and they're nothing to sleep on. And the PJs specifically are the badasses who save the badasses when they're in a jam. So because of that, I have to give the Air Force a 9 out of 10 for its specialized roles. And then when we look at its historical lethality, Air Force is no slouch there either. From World War II when they were firebombing, dropping multiple bombs, all the way to Desert Storm where they were doing precision airstrikes. The Air Force has played a crucial yet indirect role in warfare. They can do a lot of damage quickly, and because they do it with their aircrafts, their casualty to kills ratio is crazy. But because most of their killing is done from the sky, gotta be real and give the Air Force a 7 out of 10 for its historic lethality. I want to give it more, but it's not like your traditional person on the ground returning fire and getting fired on. So I want to keep it fair and give them a 7 out of 10, even though it's my favorite branch. So overall, this gives the Air Force a toughness score of a 6.2 out of 10. Next, we have the Coast Guard. A lot of people don't even include them, but their missions are way more dangerous than you think. So let's start with their physical fitness requirement. So the Coast Guard's PT standards are very similar to the Air Force, but there are some differences. So they have the normal push-ups, sit-ups, 1.5 mile run. Then they start changing it up a little bit, and I understand because they deal with water. So one exercise that they add is a sit and reach exercise. They basically trying to test your flexibility and mobility, and you're supposed to reach to your feet and see how far you can get. But it also has a swim circuit, and they want you to jump off of a platform, and I'm getting mixed reviews when I look it up. I'm seeing 5 feet, I'm seeing 6 foot. Either way, they want you to jump off a platform. They want you to swim. Once again, I'm seeing mixed stuff. I'm seeing 100 yards and I'm seeing 500 yards. I'm kind of confused on what they're asking, but they want you to swim and they also want you to tread water. Now look, y'all, I don't want to perpetuate any stereotypes, but anytime there's water involved and you want me to do some type of physical activities, automatically that's a no. you're gonna get some extra points just for that. So I have to say that this PT test is harder than the Air Force's. And because of that, I'm gonna give them a 6 out of 10 on the physical fitness requirements. Then we look at their training intensity or their boot camp requirements. And the Coast Guard is kind of similar to the Air Force, except they're a little bit longer. They have an 8-week course, about a half week longer than the Air Force's. And it's also like the Air Force, it's not much of a physical grind, more of mental endurance and mastering complex maritime operations because they will be dealing with water. I went ahead and gave them a training intensity score of a 7 out of 10 just because of the water. Now I may be biased, but anytime you throw water into the equation, it automatically gets harder. As far as their deployments and likelihood to see combat. Now the Coast Guard can deploy to some of the locations like the Navy does, but traditionally they're more working with homeland security and they're dealing with drug interdiction and terrorism and people trying to cross borders. Anytime you're dealing with the cartel and you're trying to stop them from moving drugs, that's dangerous. Not only that, but when they're saving people's lives, sometimes this water isn't the calmest seas and they're out there. So even though they're not commonly deploying like a typical military branch, we gotta put some respect on the Coast Guard. So I gave them a 6 out of 10 for their members' combat readiness. Now, as far as their specialized roles, the Coast Guard has what you call the elite deployable specialized forces. And there's a bunch of different things that fall under this umbrella, but these people perform high-risk operations like counterterrorism and drug interdiction. I tried to find more about their training requirements for their special forces, but either they're being very secretive or they just don't have that much of a presence on the internet. I don't know what it is, but it's really hard to find the requirements for their special forces. But everything that I saw says that they're no slouch. So with that being said, I wanted to give their specialized roles a 7 out of 10. And lastly, let's look at their historic lethality. So in World War II, they did do convoy escorts, but more recently, they've helped in the Middle East and they helped with some of the anti-piracy missions in Africa. So they dibbled and dabbled in different missions all throughout the history of the United States. So with that being said, I have to give them a 6 out of 10 for their historic lethality. And this brings the Coast Guard's total toughness score to a 6.4 out of 10. Just a little bit higher than the Air Force. Next, we're gonna look at the Navy. That fog is. So the Navy's physical requirements are also very similar to the Air Force and all the previous branches that we talked about, where they also have the push-ups, they have the sit-ups, the planks if you want to, in a 1.5 mile run. But then they get a little bit wild with their alternative tests. They give you an option to skip the run altogether, and you could do 2,000 meters of rowing on a machine, which isn't bad. Then they go out the deep end and give you an option to either swim 450 meters or 500 yards. Like I said earlier, y'all, I am not swimming. I can swim. I want y'all to know that I can swim. I just swim to survive. I don't swim for exercise. Like, it's two different things. So because of that, I have to give them a 6 out of 10 for their physical requirements. As far as their training intensity, the Navy used to have an 8-week basic training, but they moved it to 10 weeks. I don't remember how long ago that was, but that made it a little bit more intense. They work on your mental endurance, but they also get you into the fighting shape needed for sea operations. Y'all, they teach you how to be a firefighter, or at least teach you how to put out fires on a ship. Just thinking about that, being on a ship and it catches fire, that's gotta be scary as hell. They also teach you how to swim in Navy basic training. And just like the Coast Guard, neither one of them require you to know how to swim prior to coming to basic training. They will teach you the necessary skills to swim, but they have a test at the end of basic training that you have to complete to show your swimming capabilities or your swimming competence. So I have to give them a training intensity score of a 6 out of 10. Now, as far as their deployments and likelihood to see combat, you know, the Navy's strength lies in its naval fleets and its air power. They actually have a huge air force. A lot of people, when they think Navy, they think ships, but they have a huge air force. But their sailors, most likely, if they were to see combat, it'll be from a ship, not necessarily hand-to-hand type of combat. So because of that, I have to give them a 5 out of 10 on their members' combat readiness. Now, as far as their specialized roles, the Navy has, in my opinion, and I don't want to piss anybody off. See, when you do these type of videos and it's subjective like this, you can always piss people off. But in my opinion, the Navy has the most elite special forces, and that is because of their Navy SEALs. They've conducted some of the most high intense missions in the world for special forces, all the way from the Panama invasion to the killing of Osama bin Laden. The Navy SEALs were responsible for that. And they're training, these guys are studs. It'd be hard to say the Navy's special forces are lesser than any other special forces. So I don't want to piss anybody off, but because of how intense they are, I got to give them a 10 out of 10 for their specialized roles. Go Navy. And then when we look at their historic lethality, the Navy's always been in pivotal naval battles since the beginning of wars. All the way from the Battle of Midway and their lethal strikes from their aircraft carriers and more recent battles, the Navy has an undeniable lethal history. So I gotta give them a 7 out of 10 for their historic lethality. And this gives the Navy an overall toughness score of a 6.9 out of 10. Next up, we have the Army. My dad did 21, 22 years in the Army, so I got a lot of respect for them. But you know, they're the backbone of the US military and its ground forces. So let's see how they stack up. As far as their physical fitness requirements, things start to change. From the other branches, the Army starts changing a bit with its physical fitness requirements. They call their physical fitness assessment the Army Combat Fitness Test. It has the word combat in it, so you know they're preparing you for combat. And it's a completely different challenge from the ones mentioned before. It's no longer just your regular push-ups and sit-ups. You gotta think deadlifts, power throws, hand release push-ups, sprint, drag, carry drills, and a 2-mile run. This test demands strength, endurance, and agility, making it one of the most complete and difficult PT tests in the military. So I gotta give them a fitness score of an 8 out of 10. As far as their training intensity, the Army basic training course is 10 weeks long, like the Navy's, and it's designed to transform civilians into Army soldiers. Just like the other branches where they try to instill that mental endurance, they also get a lot more physical. It's one of the most grueling boot camps that the military has, with a strong focus on battlefield skills. And if you decide to be infantry, they extend this basic training, or they call it AIT, I'm not too sure, but they extend it to 22 weeks. So with that being said, I have to give the Army a 7 out of 10 for its training intensity. And for its deployment and likelihood to see combat, it's different. The Army is deployed more than any other branch. When you think deployments, you think Army. They have long deployments and they're constantly deployed, especially in their infantry and combat related roles. The Army is ground combat. That's what they do. That's what they're best at. And they're the ones kicking in the doors, engaging the enemy, and roughing people up. So I gotta give them a 9 out of 10 for their deployments and likelihood to see combat. And as far as their specialized roles, the Army has some of the most elite specialized forces as well. You got the Green Berets, you got Delta Force, got their Rangers. These people are conducting high-stake missions. These guys are doing covert operations. They're often behind enemy lines. It's dangerous. And they're a bunch of badasses. And for that, I gotta give them a 9 out of 10 for their specialized roles. And as far as their historic lethality, like, that's what people think of when they think of going to war, the Army. Matter of fact, when I'm walking out in uniform, even though I'm in the Air Force, people say, "You in the Army?" Like, you just know, they just relate historic lethality to the Army. So from the bloody fields of the Civil War battles to storming the beaches of Normandy, the Army has fought in nearly every US conflict, and it proves its deadly capabilities time and time again. So for that, I have to give them a historic lethality score of a 9 out of 10. And this brings the Army's total toughness score to an 8.8 out of 10. So what does that leave? All right, y'all, I tried to surprise you. I tried to tell you, stick around so you can see the toughest branch. But we all know that the Marines are the toughest branch, and here's why. It starts with their physical fitness requirements. Now, to even be recruited in the Marines, they pretty much make you complete an Air Force PT test just to start the recruitment process. So you gotta do some pull-ups or push-ups, you gotta do sit-ups, you gotta do a plank, and you gotta do a 1.5 mile run just to be put into their depth. Once you're in the Marines, you have to complete 2 different PT tests annually. You have one they call a physical fitness test, It's called a PFT, and from January to June, you have to complete this test. This test includes pull-ups or push-ups for some, a time plank, and a timed 3-mile run. And then from July to December, you have to complete their combat fitness test. And this is designed to see if you're combat ready for deployment. If I'm wrong about this, somebody put it in the comments. They make you do a half-mile run. It's like a sprint, where they give you an ammo can that weighs 30 pounds. And you have to raise this above your head as many times as possible. And then they have this thing called a man under fire drill. This requires you to sprint, crawl, and then sprint again across the football field. When you reach the end of the football field, you drag your partner for a while. Then you gotta pick your partner up and fireman carry them to the point where you started. Then you gotta pick up 2 ammo cans and make your way down the field sprinting and zigzagging. Then when you reach the end of the field, you gotta drop the ammo cans and throw a grenade at a target. Like, what? Then you gotta do 3 push-ups, pick up the ammo cans, and run back. It's insane. The Marines are held to the highest fitness standard of all the branches. Now, because of that, I gotta give them a 9 out of 10 for their fitness requirements. Now, when we look at their training intensity of their basic training, they have the longest basic training. It's 13 weeks long. And it's just non-stop physical, mental grinds that they put you through. They put you on brutal hikes, you have endless drills, and then you have the infamous crucible that the recruits have to go through. I watched a video and did a reaction on the Marines basic training, and it's crazy. So I gotta give them a 9 out of 10 for their training intensity. As far as their deployment and likelihood to see combat, the Marines are always the first to the fight. They're designed to deploy at a moment's notice, whether it's storming a beach, engaging in combat, or doing amphibious stuff. Marines are always ready 24/7, and every Marine, even beyond their infantry, is trained for combat. So I gotta give them a combat readiness score of a 10 out of 10. I'm sorry. Their specialized roles, their special forces, they have their own elite units, they have Force Recon, they have MARSOC, and these are some of the hardest hitting forces out there. So I gotta give them a 9 out of 10 for their specialized roles. And then their historical lethality. The Marine Corps has led some of the most deadliest battles in US history. They're just known to be aggressive and fearless. They're the smallest branch, but they are the toughest branch. And so for their historical lethality, I gotta give them a 10 out of 10 as well. And this brings the Marines' overall toughness score to a 9.4 out of 10, making them the toughest branch in the United States military. Now, I've been talking about all the different special forces for all the different military branches, but specifically, I've made a video about the Air Force Special Warfare careers. So if you're interested, or if you ever thought about joining for the Special Forces, I got a video on the screen right now breaking down everything. Like I always say, I hope this video brought value to you. Stay beautiful, stay classy, and until next time, check me out.